Welcome to Some Things Considered, the podcast where we are obsessed with story. We celebrate creativity and we talk to cool people to find out what makes them tick. I'm your host, Sean Murphy. I'm an author. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University, and I run the nonprofit 1455 Lit Arts. For more about me and what I do, check out seanmurphy.net. Hey, welcome back to Some Things Considered. This is the podcast where we are obsessed with storytelling, and my goal is to find interesting, creative people, talk to them, and find out what makes them tick. I'm your host, Sean Murphy. And as we kick off season 6, I am absolutely thrilled to welcome Teddy Wayne to the podcast. Let me tell you about who we're dealing with today. Teddy is the author of 7 novels and a winner of the Whiting Writers Award and an NEA Creative Writing Fellowship, as well as a finalist for the Young Lions Fiction Award, the Penn Bingham Prize, and the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. Amazing. A frequent contributor to The New Yorker and former columnist for The New York Times, he lives and is coming to us live from his home in Brooklyn. You can find him online at teddywayne.com. I'm delighted to have him on, period, but we are celebrating today the imminent release of his latest book, The Au Pair. Teddy, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
So let's get right into it, man. You are on the cusp of another release, and having read it and loved it, spoiler alert, I am joining the ranks of many others who have predicted this book's going to do very well, and it's going to do very well for a good reason. It's a great book, and it's an easy read, which is just what the doctor ordered in the summer of 2026. I can do no better, so I will quote Ayad Akhtar, who writes in his blurb, "The Au Pair is a page-turning thriller wrapped in an elegy for the literary novel," which has me at hello. Tell us more about how you respond to that blurb and maybe introduce the book for us.
He really nailed it. The Au Pair is about, I'll describe it, a 45-year-old Brooklyn novelist named Stephen Hammer, who had a big debut novel 9 years earlier. His second one was a bust, and his writing career is on the rocks. He's married to a woman in finance who completely supports the family. He's now getting an allowance from her that they call a stipend to spare him the indignity of calling it an allowance. And he's at it's a midlife crisis, of course, but there's a self-awareness to this as a midlife crisis type of novel. um the book itself came to me, and there's more to it. They hire an au pair. You
Yeah.
can guess where that goes. Other things happen, but the au pair reveres his neglected novels is part of the thing. So he's a novelist who, like many novelists, whether successful or not, is deeply insecure and needs validation from others. And lo and behold, he gets it in the form only of this beautiful 24-year-old Norwegian who seems to idolize him. The idea came to me because I thought of it as first, I conceived of it as a short story. I'd seen the movie Anatomy of a Fall, really loved the ambiguous murder or death in it,
Yeah.
and loved how that ambiguity was never resolved. Wanted to write something that has similar kind of narrative trajectory. And because my last book had a nice movie deal, The Winner, it's called, I thought maybe I could just write this as a short story, not go all the way into a novel. And my film team can sell it as a short story, as intellectual property to Hollywood for me to adapt. These are the sort of things you think about when you're in your 40s, as opposed to when you're maybe 31, when I started out writing, when you have a
Yeah.
family to support and so on.
Yeah.
A somewhat cynical ploy, or play, let's say, not ploy, but
Yeah.
play.
Yeah.
I started writing it. Within a day or two, I got very interested in it and thought there's a lot more depth here than I gave it credit for, and wanted to write it as a novel and began doing so. But that initial, somewhat cynical impulse of packaging it as Hollywood property doesn't get more mercenary than that as a creative writer,
Yeah.
became one of the driving themes of the book. Of this is how one has to make a living now as a novelist in the 21st century. Either you write something that seems Netflix adaptable from the start, or you're a professor somewhere and you have a steady job. But or you're one of the select anointed few who gets a lot of money, and for every novel you publish. But that's pretty hard to break into the ranks of, and it's as much based on, I'd say, luck as talent. There are a lot of talented writers out there who don't get that. So that feels like that's the elegy for the literary novel. 40 years ago, you could make a decent living probably as a writer of literary fiction and support a family in Brooklyn. Now that's kind of impossible unless you're doing something else.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that nails the themes and concerns and shows why I'm so excited to talk about this because what I was going to facetiously say is as a writer and someone who's written both published and especially unpublished literary fiction, some of which dates back to my 20s, I don't recognize these themes at all. Just kidding. So I think while I shouldn't be at pains, I think I've made it very clear. I really recommend this book. I think it does thread that needle of being applicable and will be enjoyed by a wide, diverse audience, which is we can break down what an achievement that is. But there's a little extra spice in here for serious readers, English majors, and writers because you do in a very subtle and in compelling way tease out some of these concerns which we're living through and you just articulated, which is writing's always been challenging, making a living always been challenging, but there was a framework 20, 30 years ago that was at least recognizable as the professor dash poet. Those lanes are narrowing, and the fact that the novel exists within these very contemporary concerns gives it, an extra edge, and why I would say you can't be a writer in 2026 and not read this book. We'll get to that. I've got a bunch of questions about where we are as writers right now, but um, the combination of being inspired by a movie, which also a great movie, and I love the ambiguity of that, and having read the Au Pair, um, I'm happy to say I'm humbled and happy to say I didn't see the twists and turns. So, it was very readable and digestible, but you pack in some really good suspense. I'm curious, as what are we a reformed and evolving literary writer, um, how easy does the suspense come to you and the thrills? And I know people want to hear about how did you map it out? How much of this was a surprise to you as you went along? Maybe talk us through like the thriller element and how to keep it readable and compelling, but also not give away. Because I think people might misunderstand a book that's easier. I won't say easy because that seems
Mm.
like an insult, but easier to read is not that easy to pull off. So talk a little bit about your process.
Yeah, so I've written, published, not written, published 7 books now. The last two have been categorized as literary thrillers by the publisher. The first 5 were not. They're all considered literary fiction, but they all had these thrillerish elements to them, an engine, a plot engine that wasn't just pure interiority. Even I'd say the quietest one, called Apartment, was my fourth one, was the most interior of them all. Even that had a bit of a thrillery climax to it. So it's not something I was coming to cold. At the same time, I'm not really a reader of thrillers. I read like one every few years, maybe. And there tend to be the big ones, Gone Girl, The Woman in the Window, whatever, things like that.
Yep.
Uh, just because it occasionally I enjoy them, but for the most part, and this is not to cast aspersions, plot twists every 3 pages don't do it for me. I need
Yeah.
something else, and I think most of them are written calibrated to that kind of reader who does like that sort of book. But anyway, I'd been doing a kind of, let's say, junior varsity version of this for the first 5 books anyway, and the
Yeah.
last two really ramped it up and hopefully joined the varsity team. Um, I very much plot these things out beforehand, but they're not completely plotted. There's still a lot of room for spontaneity and improvisation. Other ideas come to me after a draft is written for how to accelerate or complicate those plots. But I would have a hard time writing these last two in particular without some kind of roadmap ahead of me for what should be there. And there's tricks and I've learned from just having been a writer for years and having taught fiction that are more important for thrillers than even for regular novels, like a midpoint reversal, which is something sounds like what it is at the midpoint, something that either recasts the whole first half in a new light, ideally, while
Yeah.
also sending you off in a new direction for the second half.
Yeah.
I won't spoil too much, but something quite dramatic happens in both the winner and the au pair around the midpoint for both of them. That's where you put it. Something like The Talented Mr. Ripley, granted, has a murder coming about a third of the way through.
Yeah.
So there's ways you can change this, but I'm sure I don't know what it is, but I'm sure there's a midpoint reversal in that book too that has something drastic happening right around the midpoint.
Yeah.
Um, these things become instinctive to most writers after a while, but I think it
Yeah.
behooves you if you're writing something that's drifting to genre territory to get a sense of where are these somewhat formulaic markers and what are they and where do they occur and how do you pull them off. It helps to learn them and study them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what's important for me to point out is there's a tremendous respect for the reader, both in the prose, but also in everything you're saying. And I want to kind of acknowledge that very plainly, which is again, especially in 2026, I think we can no longer afford the illusion that reading should be difficult or reading has to be challenging. I think that's what turns off potential fans of literature, this notion that it should be difficult, but also this inherent respect for the reader's time, which again has always been thus, but now I think more so. And what I really appreciate about your writing, Teddy, is it's grounded in a lot of these concerns and sub themes, but there's this notion of not wanting to waste time, not being too pretentious. And for me anyway, I stand in awe as a more literary writer. Like plot is just I think it comes easily for some and is impossible for others, and most of us navigate that kind of weird middle road. But this really achieved being very plot driven. But I care about these characters and want to learn more about them. So what better description than literary thriller? But at the same time, wanting I would say it's soulful, and it has fun subverting some cliches, right? Like we have a power dynamic in the marriage. I think we're accustomed to seeing, maybe we expect to see the powerful toxic male, and the woman kind of rising above that, which we all love. This is kind of the opposite. We have a toxic, powerful alpha wife, and so not only is there the kind of wealth dynamic, but then you have a writer who is struggling with self-doubt. Talk a little bit of maybe about how much fun you had with really going into that ditch of the proverbial writer who's already riddled with doubt and insecurity, much of it genuine as opposed to what's in all of our heads, but also this notion of I need to write so I can kind of continue to make a living.
Yeah, or just to have a sense of self-esteem and to not feel like he's a freeloader.
Yeah.
Something in the back of my mind as I wrote this was thinking of Stephen. It's not named the year, but it's clearly contemporary. Thinking of what his counterpart would have been in, let's say it's set in 2026 now, who his 1976 counterpart would have been. It would be a very different novel. He would not be, maybe he'd be faltering his career, but he wouldn't quite feel quite as emasculated as he does now. It's doubtful his wife would have had a high-powered finance career in 1976. It's just would have been a Philip Roth novel in which the guy has his career's taken a hit, but he's still, the man of the household, the head of the household. He does not
Yeah.
feel like that way at all now. He's all but the stay-at-home dad, except for the fact that they have a nanny who lives with them
Yeah.
at the beginning, and then an au pair, of course, eventually. So that was in my mind as this massive power shift that reflects larger societal shifts that are all around us. Many people who've read this, who read it in advance, that is, have told me a lot of female readers have felt like it's like this for them. They are the breadwinners. Their husbands are unemployed or semi-employed now. Maybe they had a job early on, but something has happened. And this is not an uncommon dynamic anymore in the way that it would have been uncommon even 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's very much a modern dilemma. There's nothing inherently wrong about one person supporting the other. That's what marriage should be when they hit hard times. But
Yeah.
it's a new thing for men who have ruled the roost for all of time to suddenly feel economically disenfranchised and their reactions to it. And a Brooklyn novelist whose career's hit a rut is a far cry from a January 6er storming the Capitol, but
Yeah.
they're of a piece. They're part of the same species of feeling like
Yeah.
they were once on top and now they're not, and they're angry about it. Stephen's not an angry, violent guy at all, but
Yeah.
his insecurity and neediness finds its form in through other expressions.
Well put. And yeah, what I when I say subtle, with a capital S, it doesn't mention a lot of detail about what year we're in. It's very obvious we're in the contemporary kind of realm, but I think these societal pressures you talk about, like if we peel the onion back, it's the writer's dilemma, it's the not having success dilemma, but there are these societal pressures, I think, that kind of undergird the novel, and I think anyone reading it, whatever they do for a living, and if they don't have any creative aspirations, there is this unbearable weight that exists now that I think, whether it's security, financial and otherwise, and this notion of all of us having to do more with less, that really comes to life. So what we don't get right is this, and you mentioned Roth, and I love Roth. I'll stand up and be counted, but there isn't this unbearable egoism and if only I was more the center of the universe, the world would be okay. There's a real acknowledgement that there's almost a kind of sardonic appreciation. There's tremendous empathy for Stephen, but there's also kind of you're not afraid to kind of take the piss out of his self-importance and also like the awareness as the author that okay, so you're not going to make a living. There are other ways you could contribute. Maybe some of your disenchantment is because you aren't doing the most with your time. I love how you play with that, and it does feel very Brooklyn-y, kind of
Right.
that level of angst.
And he's willing to be the stay-at-home dad. His wife shoots down the idea,
Yeah,
probably because she thinks this is undignified for him. She doesn't want to have a stay-at-home husband, um, which would be a completely rational and honorable thing to do. If one spouse makes enough money, why not do that? But for him, it would feel like he's being knocked off his perch from where he once was, and
yeah,
it's a lot about, I'd say, the status consciousness of this type of couple, at least at the beginning. I think it turns into something else, but the other difference I'd say between this and the Philip Roth novel that might have been written in 1976 about the same guy is there's a self-awareness from both Stephen a little bit, but certainly I think from the author or the book itself that about what he's representing and what he is. And there would be no acknowledgement, for instance, in the Roth novel of the age gap as potentially problematic, or maybe a glancing nod to it. This
yeah.
it's very clear he's aware of this. He knows what it looks like. He's pursuing it anyway, but it's not treating it as the default state of thing how things should be that a 45-year-old man is with a 24-year-old woman.
Yeah, and I think you're also both too intelligent, and I spoke earlier of the respect for the readership, not in a implied cultural, straitjacket, but this sense of it also in certain novels by certain types of men, like A, there is no problem with it, and B, it does solve everything. Like I've got this nameless younger woman that adores me and it gives me my vitality. Stephen wrestles quite a bit with all of that and how unreal it seems. And again, I think this is all very subtly done and masterfully done on your part, but it takes and subverts a lot of these cliches. Like there is a younger, incredibly attractive woman that not only adores him, but seems to have deeply read and understood his work. Again, I think any reader is going to get that and enjoy it. But for writers out there, this idea of finding your ideal reader and it happens to be a beautiful woman, you have a lot of fun with that. And I think that also flavors, some of the frank and I think convincingly rendered sexual scenes. You're not afraid to go there. Maybe talk a little bit about either the fun, the challenges, both the good, the bad, and the ugly of writing sex scenes that don't make you, the author, or the reader cringe or feel like I've seen this before.
My guess is it will make some readers cringe. My last book, The Winner, had even more sex scenes, or maybe not the same amount, but they were quite graphic, some of them. it was in that case the graphic ones were between a younger man and an older woman, so it didn't have the power imbalance that makes people shudder in the same way. But I think plenty of people readers were not into it. My feeling is I had to render this with realism and to show why he's being so drawn to this. It's not just that she's beautiful, it's that
Yeah.
their sexual chemistry is something that he can't deny. Um, to skip over it and to show them going to bed and then white space and then here that was great. He said postcoitally would have felt inauthentic and
Yeah.
even prudish, and that prudishness would not have served the book.
Yeah.
It would have felt like the book's sensibility was being tempered or toned down by an author who was afraid to graphically render what is a graphically vivid experience for this guy. Um, at the same time, you don't want to overdo it and just write smut for the sake of it, or
Right.
there's a fine line between pornography and art, and we all know it when we see it.
Yeah.
Um, but then you also don't want to be full broth again and write things that are frankly misogynist
Yeah.
and just will be cringe-inducingly outdated within
Yeah.
3 years, let alone 20 years. And in the way that when you read a sex scene, I'm reading Rabbit Run now by Updike. Things have changed quite a bit since 1960, and it shows.
Yeah. Yeah.
Culturally, things have changed. Men's biology has not changed at all since then. We
Right.
are still the bodies we once were, but we've evolved significantly.
Yeah.
But you've got to maybe acknowledge that underneath the progressive evolution of certainly at least a guy like Steven, half the country is not quite there yet. Um, he's still wrestling with the same biological urges that Rabbit Angstrom was wrestling with, or Zuckerman is wrestling with in the Roth novels, and that has to be honored and conveyed, or else you're writing something that's just kind of pandering to what people want to see men as now instead of how they sort of still are underneath it all.
Yeah, and I love that you bring up Updike in particular and going back, at this point almost a full century, but even in the way late 20th century, I feel like the writing itself, to get a little meta, there was an implied respect, even if we were writing or thinking about an author that was a failure. As we already discussed, they probably were a professor, at least making a living. I just think it hits different now, and you brought up the junior. I think bringing up Rabbit Angstrom in a January 6th is not a jarring, or it's not a non sequitur. I think it hits differently in 2026. Just the whole notion of what is a man, what should a man be, both intellectually, practically, and this pressure where I think that again the readers are going to understand whether you're a writer or a professor or whatever, if you're not making money or you're not successful, you're a loser. And again, I think on a lot of levels, that packs a bigger punch because again, we're all feeling that now. And I think that's more of a capitalism issue than even a cultural or sexual issue. Talk a little bit about if you agree or how that, because I think you've already articulated it, but yeah, I mean, everything about this novel is of its time, but it has this kind of undercurrent of it's responding to
Hmm.
very American issues.
I'd say precarity is one of the dominant themes of American literature of late. You'd be hard pressed to find a character in a book who doesn't have some pressures on them. You'd be hard pressed to find a human in America, except for
Yeah,
the very rich, who are still afraid of losing their very rich status. It was certainly a predominant theme in The Winner and The Great Man Theory, the one now before that. For this
yeah,
one, because Stephen is still actually financially fine based on his wife's income, it's
yeah,
less about his own economic precarity because he's taken care of, and more
yeah,
about his cultural precarity, his social precarity, his sense of irrelevance. The idea that he is faded from his prominence he had even just a short 9 years ago. He's probably never going to get it again. And this is not just a thing that happens to writers a lot, but it does. Plenty of writers
yeah,
have a big hit and then nothing happens and they're kind of back to not even where they started from, but maybe lower. It's harder to get back.
yeah,
Um, there's a subtext of the irrelevance of the white male novelist here, that Stephen never quite articulates, but I think his agent hints at it at some point without saying the words,
Yeah.
that he recognizes his time has passed. And I'll say the thing you're supposed to say, which is, of course, we need to have things have to even out. This is only fair that he had his turn in the spotlight, let others come in. But for this
Yeah.
guy, when you're actually the one being the one losing out, it doesn't feel great nonetheless. And whatever liberal pieties you might espouse about how this is only fair doesn't do the
Yeah.
person suffering from it in the moment any good. So without him turning into a kind of January 6er again, or a Trump guy,
Yeah.
there's the recognition that this is it for him, and maybe he lost his chance. He had a turn in the spotlight and it's gone, and both because of his own career but also larger social forces, he's never recovering it.
Yeah, and I think this novel, straddles this what we're talking about, this precarity, that's the perfect word. It's really more of an existential um, you know, desert and sense of these opportunities slipping away. And in that regard, it's interesting to me anyway, because it is very squarely located in it's about a writer and a specific type of writer in a specific time period. But I think, in an interesting way, that type of feeling of precarity and insecurity is actually starting to mirror basically no longer do artists exist in this rarefied space where even if they were not successful, they were fighting the good fight, and there was a societal kind
Mm.
of pedigree that comes with that, where now it's like now everyone is in the same boat and you are what you earn, or whatever cliche we want to invoke. I think in that regard, it's fascinating to me that this is a book about a writer and goes into that very specifically, and yet it has this kind of universal understanding of the pressure maybe that men are under, certainly white men are under, white male artists are under, but it resonates in ways that's like this is what white collar are waking up to, where in the past, these types of concerns would be more blue collary, industries disappearing,
Yeah.
despair, lack of a sense of self. It's like get in, the water's warm. Now writers are in that world too. And I think we're going to see more books exploring this, because I share the opinion that I don't see a golden era coming back with the existing kind of state of things.
Yeah, I don't mean to portray this as a white male grievance novel. It's not that. It's really, like I had Akhtar said in the blurb, an elegy for the literary novel, for the novel that is not going to become a Netflix show with a murder on the first page and then 6 months earlier, that kind of book. That is
Yeah.
so. You said that the book should not maybe be hard to read, challenging to read anymore because we're losing people, but nor should they just be screenplays on the page, in my opinion, at least. And I feel like there's a lot of like that, and those are the ones that tend to succeed in the marketplace now. Ones
Yeah.
that feel like you're reading, just a script that's ready to be filmed.
Yeah.
It is a shrinking industry. Yeah, books maybe are still doing okay, but it's because of like romantasy and other stuff that,
Yeah.
again, not to be disdainful of these things, it's not what I read.
Right.
The literary novel, I every indication is that it just keeps getting smaller and smaller each year, with exceptions, of course.
Yeah.
Um, and that especially the kind of quiet domestic fiction that was what most books were from, let's say, 1880 to 2000 or so, is
Yeah.
is getting more and more pushed into smaller and smaller corners. And that you need, as his agent says, I think, something explosive and page turning to make any kind of noise. So this book is also very self-aware about what kind of book it is. It is a literary thriller. I'd say the first two-fifths of it are more on the literary side. The second two-fifths are more on the thriller side. The
Yeah.
last fifth is something of a hybrid form of the two. Um, and it's about its own genre. It's that Stephen himself is a writer of literary fiction, is the unwitting protagonist of a thriller, without realizing it. And there's something about the evolution of his own writing in it that I won't get into,
Yeah.
but it's it's meta without being, I hope, too coy about its meta-ness.
It isn't, and in fact, taking that a step further, yeah, I mentioned earlier this inherent kind of respect for the audience. I think books that don't resonate either as more literary or I guess more thrillery, um, if it doesn't ring true. And I'm curious about like we've got courtroom drama, literally. We've got kind of the police procedural, which is handled very deftly. Because again, we recognize these detectives and police officers, but we don't. Talk about the research you do and how much how concerned you are with people that maybe do read more procedural or courtroom and finding that balance between making it readable and understanding. People don't need us to go into the 10 feet deep, but we do need to believe that this is happening the way it's described.
Yeah. My main research is I'm fortunate to be friends with an assistant DA in the Bronx and an NYPD detective. And for the last two
Brilliant.
books, I bombard them with questions, and they even helped me come up with plot turns. For the last one, the winner, the DA gave me the idea for the very ending of the book. In both cases, when there's a death in both books, that's not spoiling anything.
Yeah.
Um, both were very helpful in figuring out what are the right conditions to make this properly ambiguous so that there can be a compelling court case surrounding it. Um, so those are my two main sources. Uh, the rest is, just general research you do, but it's surprising, even as a lay person, what you pick up from movies and TV shows and books over decades of watching the occasional courtroom drama or reading the occasional courtroom novel. You have a sense of how it does work. I would then go through carefully, make sure there's nothing that's out of bounds here. That really the risk is things that would merit an objection that that would be sustained, and which a lawyer reading it would say this would never pass muster in a courtroom. I think I did pretty okay on that regard. But there were
Yeah.
times I think I didn't at first in earlier drafts and had to revise and make sure that it was there. You don't want to
Yeah.
have, waste time showing someone swearing in, whatever, marking an exhibit. These things that have to be in the courtroom in real life that are boring, that take up a long
Yeah.
time. There's a reason they
Yeah.
don't actually interview that many people per day. There's a lot of just procedural stuff around the testimony that's tedious.
Yeah.
So the same way I try to write scenes normally, which is start as late as possible, get to the heart of it, make sure each beat elevates, escalates the tension,
Yeah.
leave the scene as soon as possible. These are dictums I try to adhere to in normal writing. I'm really aware of them for courtroom scenes. Let's not let this drag on too long. Um,
Yeah.
don't have grandstanding speeches; those don't really exist that much in real life. And just make it feel like this is a tense, taut scene
Yeah.
that moves the action forward. And I'm
Yeah.
pretty mindful of the reader's attention span and time. I want to write books now. It seems like that you can read in maybe two sittings is what I'm sort of aiming for. This is a little bit shorter than the winner is about 300 pages. This is like 240.
Yeah.
Um, People often tell me they read them in like two over the course of 2 days, which I
Yeah.
think is yes, there's something to be said for a book that takes you weeks to read and you're absorbed in the world. But for the books I'm writing that are intended to be propulsive and page turning, I think like a 2 to 3 day reading time, provided life doesn't get in the way, is kind of what you want to aim for of like a real adrenaline shot for the reader.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, Amen to all of that. And I think again, my only concern talking to you is I want to make sure I'm doing my part to convey to everyone watching a very genuine admiration of it's so clear to me that you are at this point very mature writer. So you understand some of these things instinctively as well as
Mhm.
spoiler for everyone out there. Part of being a good writer is doing it a lot and figuring out what doesn't work, the art of revision. But having an idea, whether we're talking about literary fiction, I think what's important for maybe younger writers to understand is no one is telling you don't write, what's in your mind or write what you feel good about that you told the story you wanted to tell. But at the same time, don't be shocked if you're having a hard time finding an agent or a readership, if you're not at least attuned to some of the prevailing, pressures and demands of a contemporary readership, which doesn't mean I certainly don't mean watering it down or putting in things just for the sake of readability, but it's this respect and this inherent understanding of if attention spans at this point it's like scientifically proven there maybe is less wiggle room for a literary writer, and maybe we shouldn't expect, and I think that gets into, you just talked a lot without specifically mentioning craft. You're talking about craft, doing the research, having the respect of experts to say, I'm going to change the trajectory of this narrative based on this idea I just got. There's a humility in there that I find very refreshing, Teddy, that you are a successful and experienced writer and teacher at this point, but you're also understanding the goal is to write the best book and being open to how that can change throughout the process. I'm certain that in the classroom, you're having these discussions all the time, right? This very fine line between write the book you want to write or the poem or whatever, but be wary, be cognizant of what the audience might expect or want.
In my first class, I always say you should only write the book you want to read. You'd want to read yourself.
Yeah,
Because I think, first of all, that's the only honorable way to do it. If you're trying to just make money, there are easier ways to make money in the world than writing novels. At this
sure.
point, I can't do it. There's nothing I'm qualified for that would make more money than
Yeah,
this. But if you're starting out, probably there's other things you can do. So there's the integrity, authenticity issue, but also I've always found when I have tried to sell out in the past in any form, usually it's been screenwriting, it's a failure. I'm not able to do it. I
yeah,
think the only people who can sell out are those seemingly sell out are those for whom that sellout material is what they're actually naturally drawn to. So
yeah,
I couldn't, and again, I'm not trying to put these things down. The
yeah,
sort of classic airport thriller, the big blocky titles, I could
sure.
write that book even if I tried. I wouldn't know how to do it. It would be a bad version of it. Um,
Yeah,
Secondly, I'd say I have no aspiration to write that sort of book. I would feel like if I knew this is not what I want to be doing, even though I could pull it off
yeah,
successfully,
yeah,
maybe I'd do one just to like bankroll my family for a little while, but I wouldn't do it over and
yeah,
over again because I would feel like, why am I doing this? And why am I
yeah,
turning my precious few years on this earth into this? Not to
yeah,
put this down. If you're into it, then do it. Um, but I'm not going to say I'm above the idea of generating income from my writing.
sure.
Uh, so this is very much the book I wanted to write. I wouldn't have written it as a novel if not. When I thought it wasn't when
Yeah,
I wrote it as a short story, and then decided I actually am engaged by these themes, engaged
yeah,
by the character, compelled by the story, compelled by the world. This is going to be fun to write, and it was fun to write.
yeah,
It's nice when the thing you want to write and that's fun to write syncs up with this is potentially commercially uh, appealing to people. And I
yep,
guess I've been trending that way naturally because I maybe have gone more into that as a consumer of media, probably more
yeah,
so in the TV movie realm, watching things like White Lotus. I get the sense of I like having a murder here. That's then it's the undergirding story that keeps the
yeah,
dramatic tension and stakes, but then we explore other themes and other characters that are not just, you know, purely the hard-boiled cop in the gritty underworld. That's not, I couldn't write that anyway either myself. I have
yeah,
no connection with that. What I've done are two novels in a row with either deaths or murders. I won't spoil anything in worlds that don't see this too often,
yeah,
and with a character at the heart of it who's not a criminal, a lifelong criminal, who's this is his first exposure to this too. Because
yeah,
it's kind of how I would respond if I were in this position, being completely ignorant of how criminality works.
right.
That's more interesting to me than a portrait of a 30-year veteran criminal or a 30-year veteran cop who's seen this a
Yeah.
million times. And here's the new case that comes up.
Yeah. Yeah, and then what we're getting at, right, is to a certain extent is formula versus, the freedom of what literary fiction offers. And to put it as crudely and succinctly as I can think of, based on what you just said, is, coming up with a serviceable plot that might get people interested as a delivery device for the writing that then occurs. And I think people maybe either get that backwards or lest anyone, because I can't have these discussions without being self-aware. The last thing I ever want to do is offer platitudes or say, write the book you want to write. But the reality, decade after decade, and the more people I talk to, is even if you're successful, which is very challenging, you're not going to be happy. You're not going to scratch that itch if even with success you've written something you don't feel strongly about,
Mhm.
or you already articulated there's a lot of different ways to take a crack at this, but it's like there's a lot of other ways to make money. And boy, it's a career that is so fraught with solitude and rejection.
Yeah,
Why would you want to spend that much time and put yourself into something if you're not even writing the book that you'd want to read? And I think it's an enigma. It takes decades maybe to figure that out and find one's own style, but it really is that simple at a fundamental level. If you're not having some fun with this, maybe it isn't for you for the long haul. You have to be respecting yourself before you respect the reader.
for sure. And the book you want to write that only you can write, even if it's low stakes and plotless, is going to be better and will get published more easily than the halfway version of the commercial book you think you should write. And you've got a better shot with that. That said, I also teach my students and think very much in my own work about maybe the higher stakes are better than lower stakes for a book. It gets people excited. Maybe
Yeah,
having a storyline that moves forward is better than one that's inert. Um, maybe zingy prose is better than kind of workmanlike prose. That definitely is the case. But I
yeah.
think these things all improve the book and make it more readable, and therefore do make it more commercial. But I still think, yes, you got to write the book you want to write. But if you're writing a book that's just, there's the other version of this book, the literary version of this book is just a fraying marriage and an affair in the midst of it, and nothing else dramatic happens. That kind of book can be good. It can be very good,
Sure.
but it's wasn't what I was interested in writing myself,
Yeah.
and probably fewer people are interested in reading that too.
Yeah, and I think we can segue right into I think it's germane to point out that lest anyone, understandably think, yeah, but that's you're talking about craft and you're talking about, readability, and that seems cynical. First of all, I don't think it is, but also even because I've written a lot of nonfiction too, so I say this with respect, even nonfiction and especially nonfiction has certain very simple yet difficult to achieve goals, which is you need to have a strong opening. You need to bring the reader in. You need to say as much as you can with as little space as possible. So, all of these rules, this isn't just craft talk for litfic and how to find a contemporary audience. Some of these rules are baked in, and no matter what type of writing you're trying to do, there are editors and readers that will demand certain things, and you may be wondering why is my work not resonating, and the best answer I think always is to read ones whose work does resonate and see what they're doing. Um, Teddy, talk a little bit about your nonfiction writing and how that is either informed or helped your fiction writing and vice versa. Because again, speaking from experience, I know that they're different animals, and yet we're trying to write about something, and we're trying to hopefully connect with people that don't know us that might want to read it. Easy to say, challenging to do.
I don't do too much nonfiction writing anymore. I had I'd say a stretch. I'd say the 2010s were a lot of it. I was doing a lot of freelance journalism and had a monthly column for the New York Times called Future Tense. That would be a look at typically some contemporary trend, often technologically based. It was written, I think, 2014, 2018, around when phones became just ubiquitous and apps became ubiquitous, and we started living our lives online or on our phones much more than we had previously. Um, and I did a bunch of other journalism in that time too, and personal essays and book reviews still are kind of like the only thing I really do that much of anymore. Um, I'd say, yeah, it's maybe writing for the Times, having this broad readership, writing in a way that a prose, a voice that was stylish and but still legible to the masses is what I maybe honed in that time. I think it was just my natural writing voice too, but I think I was aware that it has to be something that pulls you in via the prose, but is you're not writing an academic article either. How do you make it appreciable by a reader with a college education is sort of what I was maybe aiming for.
Yeah.
That's maybe what you should aim for anyway. Not to shut out people who don't have college educations, but writing at
Yeah.
that level, right? Let people rise to the level. Don't have them be forced to look up every other word. Don't have syntax that's intentionally clotted. Write things that are fluid, that are understandable on first glance, but maybe second reading improves it. That's what I'm going for. It's neither totally populist nor snobby. It's somewhere in between.
Yeah, and I think based on my own, kind of considerable interest in these matters, I think that a lot of writers, as they get more experienced and have done it longer, do tend to become more readable and not the opposite. And I think that there's something to that you start to figure out it's at once utterly about you, hence the idea, the impetus to write a book, but it's not about you showing off your vocabulary. There should be this desire to connect and make it as accessible yet challenging. And I think to me anyway, that's the magic. That's the sweet spot of something that has a style, something that could only be written by that author, but is approachable, and it is not off-putting. I think too often when we talk about craft, I feel we need to be encouraging of younger writers, but remind them that the goal is to attract a readership, and there needs to be kind of an inherent ability to say something familiar in a new way. And there's discipline and probably a lot of bad writing that precedes that.
Yes. With the au pair especially, you're probably the sweet spot demographic of someone who reads a lot of fiction, is a writer, but appreciates a story and can get into that too. There's a type of pure thriller reader there Harper Collins is trying to aim for with this one, even
Yeah.
more so than with the winner, that seems like they will hopefully get into it too. I think not as intently as maybe you, perhaps in other ways more so, but I think it's not the straight thriller they're used to. There's something else there too. But I've certainly, was thinking about, all right, yeah, why not try to straddle the line here? And usually you fail when you do that. And very often you're between two stools. You neither satisfy the literary reader nor the thriller reader. If you
Yeah.
try to satisfy them both, it's sort of like, I guess, being a political centrist. No one really likes you then if you're in the
Right.
middle.
Yeah.
This is the Joe Biden of novels. No one's really that excited about it right now.
Right.
But I think there's a way. Let's view Biden's predecessor of centrism, Barack Obama, briefly at least got the left and the mainstream voters excited, and then at some point maybe alienated the left perhaps more.
Right.
Um, but I think there's a way. It's hard to do, and it's not quite a recipe for, say, Gone Girl style success, where just the entire nation's reading it. It's a recipe for something a little smaller, but hopefully still big enough to justify the book's existence, of readers who are, again, sort of erudite about fiction, how fiction works,
Yeah.
plus readers who are just big consumers of this type of genre can both find something they are drawn to in it.
Yeah, and I think what we're getting to, and it seems it invariably comes up in almost every conversation I have with a writer, is um, the balance. It's the balance of satisfying kind of personal goals, creative itches that need to be scratched, and just at least being cognizant of contemporary trends, contemporary desires, and never veering too far into cynicism and formula or
Mm,
trend chasing, which you just put in a very nice way. But it's if you're chasing something cynically from the get-go, it's probably not going to be well written, but also it's probably, even if you pull it off, the trends come and go, and by the time that book hits the shelves, it's going to be a couple few years down the road. And I always encourage people to be very wary of that, because even if you're doing all the right things, they're probably not going to be the right things 2 years from now, which is why, and this
yeah.
leads to my next question, being wary of the people that promise this is the secret. Here's how you hack it.
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware, there's no hacks. There are ways to become a smarter writer, a better writer, which, being intensely self-critical without letting it handicap your desire. But there's no easy fix. And one of the pieces you wrote that I liked, and as a writer myself with more than a couple of books, and sharing the name of other writers, I get now daily the obvious AI
Yeah.
scam, spam, promising that this is how you're going to connect with readers. Maybe talk a little bit about your own experience with that and how you're navigating other than just hitting delete. What we're all dealing with now, which is this bizarre kind of surreal AI, but not the AI that we're used to talking about, which is don't use AI as a writer. Okay, we got that.
Yeah.
This kind of intrusion into our own inboxes from ostensible allies who are anything but.
Yeah, I guess you're referring to this airmail piece I did recently. Is
Yeah.
that so?
Yeah.
I don't give them myself because my email is no longer listed, but my wife does. She's a writer. Her name is Kate Greathead, and her email's on her website, so therefore she gets these daily. And early on, before we knew what was happening, she thought one of these was real, and I looked into it and thought this seems real too. So she responded. Then the woman wrote back. Sorry, the woman, the entity, whoever's behind it,
Yeah.
wrote back with if you pay us $200, we'll blah blah blah. And I took over. I'm not proud of it, but in my earlier days as a freelance journalist, I had a sort of a prank job for a magazine where I would do pranks like this. And so I
Yep.
decided to the airmail piece is called "The Spammer Becomes the Spammee." I kind of turned the tables on them and strung them along for a while and
Yeah.
tried to be humorous about it too.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess it speaks to a larger concern, which is yes, that they're preying on naive and desperate writers who think if only I pay $300, they'll do something to put it in the Amazon algorithm and I'll finally make it. You won't. And even the legitimate ones, I'm saying you won't too. Uh,
Right.
plus the people who promise you here's how to write a novel in 30 days, just follow these tips.
Right.
No, what the way you get write a novel and publish one that is good is studying for years and reading for years and writing for years. There's
Yeah.
no real shortcut to it. I
Yeah.
guess AI itself can provide that shortcut. It won't at least currently be good, and I hope that's always the case. Otherwise, we're all really doomed. But
Yeah.
there's no real shortcut to it. Um, and I there's a whole cottage industry, it seems, of snake oil salesmen surrounding
Yeah.
writing who
Yeah.
promise you this 4 day retreat will change your novel around. Look, I teach a class twice a year, pretty much online through the Y. Um, I Yes, because as the imprimatur of an institution, it seems legitimate. It is
Yeah.
legitimate. But if I'm doing the same thing, I know. But I think
Yeah.
if we're doing the time tested route of read
Yep.
published work, discuss it in a workshop, let's talk about fiction. This is not a lightning bolt of this will change your book just in these 12 steps for how to change your book and write a winner. Um,
Yeah.
that said, I would also suggest I wrote the au pair and the winner very quickly, the first drafts, uh, in part because it just came to me quickly and it was going well and I didn't want to stop. In part
Yeah.
because I think a fast pace of a first draft at least can maybe be matched by the fast pace you're hoping the reader experiences too. There's something to be said for maybe just writing a book quickly, the first draft of it at least, and then taking your time with revision. So while I'm not totally against the idea of write a novel in 30 days, whatever they say,
Sure.
um,
Right.
in this case, I think there's a lot of not Carnarder artists, but charlatan types out there who
Yeah.
are, I guess, in their own way, desperate and trying to make money too.
Yeah. So I think the balanced approach for the individual writer in terms of craft is always good advice, although it's, ephemeral, it's difficult to discuss. It also applies right to the whole process itself, which is there are no shortcuts, but there are ways to accumulate an arsenal of strategies and tips, which reading, inquiring, taking some classes online, going with trusted vetted people, all of these things are strategies that could be employed. But I always kind of relish, even though I feel suspect because I never want to both discourage anyone, write your heart out, be cognizant of the marketplace and what might appeal, but don't lose the joy, but also, be skeptical because there's no get rich quick schemes in business. There certainly aren't in the artistic world. And I think you really do an admirable job of both walking the walk and talking the talk. You obviously talk about it in the classroom, but your writing itself reinforces that there's an interest here and there's again respect for the reader's attention and what they might be interested in.
Yeah, I think again it's a pretty lonely job for most people.
Yeah,
I've always enjoyed working from home. My wife, as I said, is a writer too, so she's home too, so that mitigates the loneliness. But I think
yeah,
most people out there, as even aspiring writers, if they were given this position of you get to write from home and that's your job, I think most people don't actually enjoy that. I think it's not conducive to well-being for the majority of people. We're social animals, and I
yeah,
tell especially younger writers, make sure this is something you actually want to do. Um, even in your best case scenario of this is it, you're a full-time writer.
yeah,
I think it's not happiness producing for most people. Partly another reason to maybe be a professor if you can do it, that it helps have a social aspect to your job.
yeah,
And I think people who do that while being less productive on the writing side have a more of a better rounded life from that. I right now have like two young children. As I said, my wife's at home. I've got plenty of interaction, and therefore
yeah.
the 5 or 6 hours I get a day to myself are precious, and I enjoy it a lot. But I still remember even my early 30s, before any of these other people were in my life as solidly. Uh, Even as someone for myself who'd always found ways to work from home for different jobs, had other jobs in offices too, but had often had this freelance work from home. I didn't always
Yeah.
enjoy it. There were some long days there where I did feel like
Sure.
this is not how you should live your life. You should be out in the daytime. I would go out more at night, but maybe Monday morning, 9 a.m. rolls around. It's good to be around people instead of in your apartment alone still.
Yeah, I think some of the loneliest and least productive writers are the most online ones right now, which,
Mm.
I think coming from the tech industry back in the day, one of the things I always point out is I was very bullish and very naively optimistic about how there was a lot about a connected world that would make us less lonely and you could find communities. And all of that is true, but it can either be too much of a good thing and too much of a distraction. Or, of course, those communities exist for people that aren't looking to encourage and support one another, the opposite. But that balanced approach of having a life where you can pay the bills so that your creating time is as enjoyable as possible might sound trite, but I certainly think it's valid, and I think you'll produce better work if you have less kind of creative stresses. That means bills being paid or interacting with people on a daily basis. So yeah, the artistic life, many shapes and sizes, and one size does not fit all.
No, and I'll just be saying cliches with this, but the writer in 2026 who's online a lot or texting a lot, they might think that substitutes for hanging out in person, but the writer in 1996 would have had to go out and mingle and meet up with people,
Totally.
and they had to do that to survive, and that was nourishing in a way that is fundamental to our nature. And I
Yeah.
do think you're right that the 2026 version of that is probably contenting themselves with just interactions through a screen and doesn't have the energy to then go out or has lost that social muscle. It's atrophied over the years and they're missing out. And then you get, I
Yeah.
think it's a separate issue, but books become about life through the internet, which are not to me the most exciting types of
Yeah.
books.
Yeah.
Both because this is a sort of obvious point that this is numbing and stultifying, and then on top of that, I think there's not exciting to read about someone looking at their phone and typing things on their screen is very low stakes and low drama.
Yeah. I think you just said the perfect word that to me summarizes everything we've talked about today, which is nourishment, self-nourishment, nourishing the readers, finding a way to nourish the creative impulse. That's the key, and the life then can feed the work. Maybe not vice versa, which is maybe the big secret. Teddy, I have enjoyed talking to you. I think the final question is both a question and a celebration. So you've been very modest. I haven't done enough to celebrate. This has already been embraced. What are we looking forward to after the book drops? Let's go. You've got a lot to be excited about. What are we going to see from you in the coming months as we promote and see how this gets evolved and adapted?
Um, your guess is as good as mine. We'll see how the world responds to it. The movie rights were sold. I adapted it for film. We'll see what happens there. I'm working on a new novel. I think the only answer to dealing with the anxieties that surround and crop up a publication, which I don't know anyone who doesn't have some kind of anxiety about its reception, is have another project you're working on that you're excited about. So I'm working on a new book, and that's nicely distracting me from this one, and again rooting me in what matters in the end. And this is the most, hoariest cliche of all, but what you will remember about the book that you wrote is not the big review you got or the sales you got, but the experience of writing it. And if that wasn't pleasurable, what was the point in the end? It's nice when other things line up too and support that, but
Sure.
uh, what you should try to hold with you is, did I enjoy doing this? Did I feel like my time was well spent? A bit like in life, who did you love? Who loved you matters more than how much money you made and so on. So I'd say that's what I try to cling to when I publish a book. And I'm currently, excited to get back to the book I'm working on now.
Enough said. I think you just covered like literally that balance, and being productive, being inspired. It's inspiring to hear about it and see it. So I'm happy for you. I'm definitely inspired by everything you're talking about, and I'm really excited to see how the au pair comes into the world. Teddy, I already said, and I'll put it on the online. How can people find you online, and how can people tell you how they're enjoying the book?
I don't do much online, as I said, as you might have gathered from my previous Jeremiah against online life. I have a Twitter account. I don't do much on it. teddywayne.com is my website. There's not going to do anything there. You could write to my publicist or agent and they'll forward an email. I'm sorry that I sound like a writer who's too good for it. I used to write these New York Times columns, and I'd get too many emails from them, and I felt like I had to take my email address off. So it's only for that reason. Maybe I should put it back on. But I don't know. I don't want to get those AI spam emails either.
Right on. Well, the best way to show support is to buy the book. So, folks, check out The Au Pair. I think you're going to love it. Teddy, all the best. Thanks for being here today. Appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Sean.
All right. Folks, we'll see you next time at Some Things Considered. Let me know what you think. And if you want to be a guest or know someone that should be a guest, let me know. Be well. Thanks for tuning in to Some Things Considered. Find out more, including how to be a guest, at seanmurphy.net. Reminder, we are obsessed with story and celebrating creativity. Also, we're here to advocate for the arts by any means necessary. Drop us a line, get involved, and support our creatives who are the lifeblood of our culture. I'm Sean Murphy. See you on the next episode of Some Things Considered.